Good morning, students. I hope you're all well. I hope you're warm. This has been some crazy weather going on right here. I can't remember a time that I've ever had it this cold. I hope you have power, electricity at your house. I do. I have lost my internet, but I'm able to learn new things and use my phone for a hotspot. And then I'm a little worried about my water supply. It's tends to be not there. Okay, but we're going to go ahead and soldier on and learn the stuff we were supposed to be learning today in school. Okay, we had a little unit on plants that we'll be learning about. So look at this great picture. Boy, that reminds us of a nice warm summer day. Well, believe me, it will be coming. This cold will end. In fact, I can't imagine that it can go on much longer. It's just not normal for this part of the country to have this type of cold for this long. So let's go on. We're going to be looking at God's design for how things work by looking at the producers. So plants are called producers because they make their own food. And they are the bottom of the food chain. We talked about the food chain. We will continue talking about the food chain next week when we look further at that, at our different types of consumers, right? So we're looking at producers now. Okay, so what about a plant? We've all seen plants. We know what they're made up of. They're green. All plants are green. There is one out there that isn't green. It's a plant that's not green. It's called the Indian pipe brush. Not paintbrush, but pipe brush. And one of my students in biology challenged me to look that up, and I found that one non-green plant. But the rest of the plants are green. Even if they look like they're red or something like that, they're actually green. All right, so let's look at the different parts of a plant. We're going to start at the bottom right here, at the root. The words are going to come up to the top right here. All right, so our roots. The roots are there to help anchor the plant in the ground and also mostly to absorb water and nutrients. So it turns out, we're going to see here at the end, for the plants to live, they have to make their own food, and they make their own food through a process called photosynthesis. They use the energy from the sun to make their own food. You probably already knew that. We'll watch a video at the end that's got lots of detail on that, probably way more than you need. But also, one of the things they need for that, besides the energy of the sun, is they need a chemical called carbon dioxide, and they need water, H2O. And so they pull that water up from the roots here. So the roots are like a sponge pulling water up the stem, which is like a straw. So here comes our stem. It transports water up. Now, it's weird that it's going up, right? Because that's going against gravity. All right, so it's pushing it up, and it's pushing up through a process called cohesion and capillary action, and then we'll look in a minute at our leaves, something called transpiration. A bunch of $2 science words right there. But trust me that what's happening is it's all serving to pull the water up the plant. Think about a very, very tall tree. The trunk of the tree would be considered its stem. And boy, howdy, does that water have to get high, doesn't it? All the way up there. And it really is sort of the magic of the leaves that are doing that. Which brings us up to the leaves. I believe that's our next thing, yeah. The leaves are broad usually. They're green usually. And that's because that is where photosynthesis takes place. All right, it happens inside the leaf. Now, you can probably think of a plant that doesn't have a broad leaf. Like, for instance, your Christmas tree would have had some little needles, right? Those are the leaves of the tree. Those little needles are very thin. All right, but there's lots of them. Okay, so think about that. Lots more of those than leaves on a regular tree. So we could either have a broad-leafed plant or a narrow-leaf plant like a evergreen, like that. Okay. Next, we talk about the flower. Not every single plant out there has a flower, but most of them do, or some form of a flower. Most of the plants you can think about are going to make a flower. Those are called angiosperms. A different kind of plant is called a gymnosperm, which is actually those evergreen trees. But I want you to think of a pine cone as a flower. Okay, so the pine cone is doing the same thing a flower is doing. So that's the question, what's the flower doing? Well, it's developing a fruit. What is the fruit holding on to? See it right here? What's that fruit holding on to? It's holding on to seeds. Okay, so here's the deal. What is the goal of a plant? The goal of every plant is to make another plant. Okay, so how are they going to make that plant? by making seeds. The seeds go into the ground and there's a new plant. So you see, God has this plan for life to proceed, for life to go on, for life to proliferate. Okay? Be fruitful and multiply. He even used the word fruitful right there. So our fruit is going to hold our seed, and we'll get into some details there. Now, what do the seeds do when we put them into the ground? They do something called germinating. Okay, so a seed is, think of a seed as a little package ready to go once it has the right criteria. Okay, so the thing, what does it need? What are the right things for a seed to grow? Well, think about it. When you put it into the ground, what do you do next? You cover it up a little bit and you add water, right? So what seeds need to germinate is they need a place, and they need water, and they need enough warmth. It has to be warm enough for that to happen. Now notice I didn't say sun. They don't need the sun just yet, except perhaps to warm the earth. All right, so you put let's say you put a seed in a cup, which we were going to do today. Yeah, that's what our lab was going to be. You put a seed in a cup, you set that cup in a sunny window. The sunny window is going to serve to warm the dirt up. Then the warm dirt will allow the seeds to germinate. So let's take a look at I believe this is a slow motion version of seeds germinating. These are he put bean seeds in a Ziploc bag. You can try this if you like. You can literally take dried beans that you eat, that your mom makes, she soaks in water and then she cooks. And you can put them in a bag like this. Now look what's happening. That root comes out first. That happens first. It reaches down. This, by the way, is a little weed popping up. It reaches down, okay? And now it's going to push the bean up. Now, once it gets to the surface out from below the dirt, look how it's going to be green. Look at those leaves. Oh, there they go. There they go. Now they need sunlight, because sunlight is going to allow those leaves. There's some leaves right there going up. Let's try this guy right here. He's a late bloomer. Let's see. He's got that. Yeah, there's the root coming down. Let's see if this one's going to rise up with its leaf coming out. Look how it's peeking out now. And we'll see these roots. Isn't that cool how it's going slow motion like that? Oh, you can't see the leaves very well. They're tucked inside. These parts of the bean you can still see right there are called the cotyledons. That's holding some food. That's part of the seed. There's the leaves. Okay. So what you saw, so this part right here is called, it looks like the bean part, right? It's called the cotyledon. We won't watch this whole thing, but I just want you to see that. Also, I want you to notice once again, look at that. This is perfect. That root goes down first, and it goes down. So let's talk about those roots. So here is that seed right here. That part is called the cotyledon. It sends up true leaves. Notice there's 2 true leaves. That's because this seed, a bean seed, I don't know which this is called a dicotyledon. It's got two sides of the bean. Think about the bean. It cracks open into 2, right? Not every plant is that way. Corn, for instance, is called a monocotyledon. It only has 1 leaf coming up. Think about grass. It's only 1 blade coming up, right? Those are called monocotyledons. That's a little more detail right there. Notice this root. What I find fascinating is no matter what, the root always knows which way is down. Okay? Furthermore, I can take some seeds and put them in a wet paper towel, and as long as it's warm enough, they'll germinate. Okay? So all they really need is warmth and water and a place. So the place would be the paper towel in this case. Okay, and they'll start to put that root, and the root will always go down, even if you say so in other words, you can't plant a seed upside down accidentally. Okay, you don't have to worry about it. It always knows which way the root is down. Which way is down for the root. So it's going to reach down. What's it reaching for? Can I hear it? Yeah, it's water, right? They're reaching for water. Notice these projections coming off of there. Those are going to reach outward to get more water. Furthermore, if you could see it, they have these really cool things on there called root hairs. And root hairs are just part of the root that reach out and increase the surface area. Here you can see them. See why they're called hairs? It does look kind of hairy right there, doesn't it? These are all little projections, increasing the surface area so there can be an increase in the ability to absorb water. Beautiful design right there. Okay, what about roots? Well, it turns out we can eat them, right? So let's look at a few examples right here. That's a root that we eat. Do you know what that is? That's called a radish. I don't know how often you eat radishes. They're kind of spicy hot, really. Typically, when you cut them open, they're red on the outside and white on the inside. Some of them have stripes on the inside. Pretty cool. Oh, you know these roots. We probably have these really often. Those are carrots. Notice the strings coming out of the sides. What are those? Those are those root hairs coming out to absorb more water. So what's happening, let me get the next one up. Those are roots like say from a plant that you put in that are reaching out. These roots here, however, they store, so remember what the plant is doing. It's going through photosynthesis and it's making something. It's making sugar. All right, it's making the sugar for itself. It turns out that it's beneficial to us. That's part of our food, right? So right here, the sugar is being stored. In this particular case, the sugar is being stored in the roots. Have you ever noticed that carrots are kind of sweet? Yeah, that's a type of sugar in there called glucose. And over here too, it may be harder to believe that that's a sweetness that's right there. Other plants store their sugar somewhere else, so not in the roots. For instance, they might store it in the fruit. That makes sense, right? The glucose changes form a little bit up in a fruit, and it's called fructose up there. It's much sweeter. So I could probably convince you that an apple is sweeter than a carrot, right? Yeah, okay. Other things will store their sugar in their stems. Let's go to that. I think that's next. Yeah. So edible stems right here. You may not think of celery as being sweet, but that's being stored. The sweetness, the glucose is being stored in the stems. But there are other kind of stems that we don't typically eat. Here's a woody stem. Okay, so it's much more rough on the outside. So a trunk of a tree would be an example of a woody stem. And then we have an herbaceous stem, which is green. So notice our edible stem of celery over here is green, so it makes this stem an herbaceous stem. All right, so the stem is green. Think about some of your plants outside that have green stems. I will tell you, since it's green, guess what's going on in there? As in addition to the leaves, there's photosynthesis happening inside the stems as well. All right, as long as there's sunlight and water, then those leaves and stems can perform photosynthesis. Yeah, pretty cool. Well, today we would have been looking at stems under a microscope. Actually, it's kind of cool. We could look at stems and roots under a microscope and see the difference. Now you can see there's a lot of complicated tissues in here. We're looking at a woody stem right here. This is, and I can tell because what I can see here is some solid nature in here. This is called the pith. If we were looking at an herbaceous stem, that middle portion would actually be hollow. I don't know if you've ever check the stems. If you have a garden or anything and you can cut through some of the stems, you can notice that many of them are actually hollow. Okay, so the herbaceous stems tend to be hollow, and the outer rim of them would carry all of that nutrient and water and stuff like that. Our woody stem, though, is solid on the inside. So we have in the middle here, it's called pith. Pith typically is tissue that has died, and it's just giving structure to the plant. It's helping it to stand tall in the case of a tree. And why do plants want to stand tall? What are they reaching for? They're reaching up for their leaves to have exposure to the sun, right? Because the sun is their source of life. Just like the sun, S-O-N, is our source of life. Pretty cool. Yeah, I always like these great Bible stories that can come from science. Okay, the rest of the tissue here we're going to see. Notice it looks like it has big holes in it. Okay, so it really does. The tissue in here is called vascular tissue. Vascular tissue has to do with little tubes carrying fluid. So it turns out that humans are vascular creatures. We have little tubes carrying fluid all through us too. What are those tubes called? Do you know? They're called arteries and veins. And what is the fluid that they're carrying? Did you get it? It's blood, right? So plants are a little different. They have the tubes running through them. They have special names too. These big ones right here are called xylem. Starts with an X, xylem. And xylem's job is to pull water up. These are like straws really going through the plant. Pull water up from the roots. Okay, the tissue is actually dead right here, and it's nice and strong and tough. So if you ever think about it, when you bite into celery and it goes crunch, that crunch is because this tissue right here has solidified, okay, and it has something called cellulose in it, and cellulose is kind of crunchy. And furthermore, if you look at the side of the celery, you can actually see the holes in there. You can see the xylem in there. The other tissue right here, along here, and then right up here, this is probably a tree right here. That's probably the bark right out here. In this tissue right here, this is living vascular tissue called phloem. Okay, so phloem is taking nutrients from that's being produced from the leaves, in other words, the sugar that's being made in photosynthesis, and it's carrying it down to be stored, whether it's going to be stored in the roots or in the stem or ultimately in a fruit. Okay, the phloem is responsible for taking the nutrients there to that spot. Okay, I always like to remember it by saying the nutrients phloem down. Okay, they phloem down. That helps us remember that phloem is taking things down from the leaves. Xylem is taking water up to the leaves. We would have been looking at different ones in the microscope, and microscopic work to me is fascinating. You would have been able to see how beautiful that is. Okay, what about our leaves? I told you we have broad leaves. See, we're looking at some broad leaves right here, and you may argue that they're all green. Okay, so this I think is like cilantro or parsley or something. Yum, we eat that. This is called ginkgo. It's from a tree called Ginkgo biloba, and it makes a special kind of fruit that we use for vitamins. Here we're looking at, looks like maple leaves right here. This is a fig leaf. This, I'm not sure exactly what that is right there, but we can see these different kind of leaves. Now, I will tell you they're all green. You may say, wait a minute, this one's yellow. Okay, well, it's also got another pigment in it. What about this one? Orange. What about this one? Purple. Well, they have other pigments. So green is the pigment that's present in every leaf. It has to be, because green is the color of the little vesicles that are carrying on photosynthesis. Okay, so technically every plant has to be green. Okay, because the green stuff, it's called chlorophyll, is what is the chemical that transfers the energy of the sun into energy in the form of sugar. But this one also has something, this purple one has something called anthocyanin in it. Okay, and this has carotene in it. Carotene was an orange and yellow red color. That's why carrots are called carrots, by the way, because they have carotene in them. And those are other pigments that are there. Now, while leaves are growing, they are performing photosynthesis. But let's think about at the end of the summer into the fall, when the leaves start to fall off the tree. What happens is, at the very base, this is called the petiole, the very base of the leaf right here, it actually scars over and no more water can get in. So if no more water can get into my leaf, guess what cannot happen? I cannot have photosynthesis. So if I don't have photosynthesis, the green part of the plant disappears. It just stops functioning and it's not working anymore. So guess what's left over? Those other pigments are left over, like our anthocyanins and our carotenes. That's why the leaves change color. There's also one that causes it to turn, it's called tannin, and the tannin causes them to turn brown. So when the water's missing, the leaves will change color to either those beautiful colors or the brown. In Texas, sadly, we tend to have them turn straight to their tannic colors, which is brown. I don't know if any of you out there drink tea, but tea uses leaves of a plant that have been dried, and tannin is the brown color. That's why tea is brown colored, because it's got the tannins from the leaf of a tea plant. And those tannins have a bitter taste to them. And so you can maybe notice when you drink a really strong tea, it makes your mouth feel kind of dry, and there's that bitterness to it. That's the tannin in the leaf. Just an interesting side note there. Okay, if we look up close now, we see our leaf right here, our broad leaf. The sunlight's coming in. If I look at my cells, you can see these little green dots right here. These are all the chlorophyll packets, okay? And the packets are called chloroplasts. So inside, here's our chloroplast. This is an artist's rendition of it, okay? And so inside our chloroplast, you can see the membranes containing chlorophyll. Okay, it just so happens that chlorophyll is green. All right, why did God choose green? I don't know. He could have chosen any color, I guess, but he chose green, and that's why plants are green. And they use that to make their own food. So the energy of the sun hits these little membranes containing chlorophyll, and it goes into a process that is beautiful. And that process is called photosynthesis. All right, and then we're going to see from there, we're going to produce our flowers. I have several flowers for us to look at right here. We're going to get back to photosynthesis. That looks like a tulip. We have some pigments in here that are yellow. Notice the flower isn't green, all right? So there's no photosynthesis happening in the flower. Here's, I think that's a peony. Maybe y'all can correct me on some of these. That is called an Indian blanket. We see those in our springtime, one of our wildflowers. This is called an allium. You'll see that on, say, an onion or something like that. Oh, and this is called a daffodil. So remember, the job of the flower is not to do photosynthesis. That's the job of the leaf. What is the job of the flower? The flower is to produce seeds. So what we have is we have this inner part right here. There's all of these are separate tiny little flowers right here, believe it or not. These are all separate tiny little flowers. This is called a composite flower. This we have right down here in the middle, and here you can't see, but down in the middle there are parts in there. I would have brought flowers today for you to take a look at, and we would have opened them up and looked at those parts on the inside. And what happens is there's pollen, and that pollen goes from one flower to another to fertilize the little seed that's being made inside this flower. How does it get from one flower to another? Usually by a pollinator, like a bee or a butterfly or something like that. All right, so my flower, the job of my flower is to make seeds, and oftentimes the seeds will be kept in something called a fruit. So this right here is a zucchini. Zucchini's my favorite vegetable, but it's actually a fruit because it has seeds on the inside of it. That's how you define a fruit, if there are seeds on the inside. For instance, a tomato has seeds on the inside. It's a fruit. All right, so what's a vegetable? That's the leaves that you eat. So if you're eating the leaves or the stem or the root, that's called a vegetable. If you're eating something that came from a flower, that's called a fruit. Okay, so right here, if you've ever grown zucchini, you might have noticed at the beginning you'll have a bunch of yellow flowers come out and no fruit. That's because those are all male flowers. And then as the plant kind of gets more mature, it'll start to produce some female flowers. Those female flowers look the same, but they have this little bulge at the bottom of them. And what's that bulge going to turn into? It's going to turn into the fruit. In this case, it'll turn into a fruit that becomes a zucchini. All right, the flower opens up wide. A bee comes in with pollen from another flower. It causes that seed to get fertilized, and that fertilized seed causes the fruit to grow with more seeds on the inside. We take the plant, we eat it, we maybe spit the seeds out, and those seeds can grow again. So you see how the flower has succeeded, the plant has succeeded in making a new plant. All right? That fleshy tissue is to make it attractive. That's also why the flowers are so pretty and why they smell good. It's to make them attractive to the pollinators. So the bees smell them and see them and they come over and they drink the nectar. The bee doesn't intend to pollinate the plant. It does it because it's just eating the nectar out of it. And it happens to take the pollen from one plant to another. It's amazing. It's a beautiful design by God. All right, let's take a look at some of our fruit. I'm not sure if I would have had some fruit today for y'all to take a look at. What's ever available in the winter time? Probably not watermelon. But you can see our watermelon. It's got the fruit. It's got the seeds in it, right? So what do we do when we eat our watermelon? We take it and we chew on that delicious, yummy red flesh. And what do we do with the seeds? We spit them out. Yeah. And guess what can happen? A new plant can grow. Hallelujah. Here's a banana. Okay, do banana have seeds? They do. If you think about it, if you cut in the middle, those little teeny tiny black spots are the seeds of a banana. Here's an interesting fact about bananas. Because we don't want the seeds to get too big, we actually don't let bananas get pollinated. Yeah, bananas don't get pollinated. They grow on their own with no pollination. If they got pollinated, the seeds would be as big as these seeds that are in the watermelon. They would be that big. Can you imagine having to eat your banana and spit out gigantic seeds like that? So that's something we've developed lately, right? This is called a star fruit. It's called that because when you cut it, it looks like a star. Inside here are some seeds. They actually taste sort of like a giant grape. I would have had one of these if they had them at the store, of course. Here's a strawberry. The strawberry is a little different because it's called an aggregate fruit. It actually has its seeds on the outside. It's still considered a fruit because the seeds are in this what we call the reproductive part of the plant, right? So this was made by a flower, all right? But these little seeds are a little different there. Next, we have the kiwi. Those are all seeds right there. Another plant that we don't allow to get pollinated are those little cutie oranges, you know, the little tiny ones. That's because we don't want seeds in there. So you might think, well, what about seedless watermelon? Yes, we've developed those. But of course, we always have to have a seed to grow a new plant. So we don't want everything to be seedless. We couldn't grow any new plants that way. Okay, so what do plants need to grow? We're back to our photosynthesis now. We're back to the real sciencey thing right here. It seems really simple. We've got water coming through the roots, we know that. We have carbon dioxide that's in the air. I didn't show you, but underneath the leaves there are these little holes called stomata, which allow the carbon dioxide in. They also have oxygen go out. They'll also drip water out of them, which aids in pulling the water up the stem, like I was telling you. There's so much to this science of plants. The science of plants is called botany, and I like botany. Yeah. So bottom line, what do we need? We need water, we need CO2, and we need sunlight. Okay, we don't necessarily have to have dirt. We could grow plants in, some people grow them in something called a hydroponic system. They're basically, the roots are reaching down just into water. Crazy stuff. Okay, so the next video we're going to watch is about photosynthesis. Now there's a lot of detailed information in here. Try to listen and hang on to the end, okay? You won't be tested over this because it's very complex, but it makes it enjoyable to watch it. So take a look.
You're facing a giant bowl of energy-packed carbon crunchies. 1 spoonful, 2, 3. Soon, you're powered up by the energy surge that comes from your meal. But how did that energy get into your bowl? Energy exists in the form of sugars made by the plant your cereal came from, like wheat or corn. As you can see, carbon is the chemical backbone, and plants get their fix of it in the form of carbon dioxide, CO2, from the air that we all breathe. But how does a plant's energy factory, housed in the stroma of the chloroplast, turn a 1-carbon gas like CO2 into a 6-carbon solid like glucose? If you're thinking photosynthesis, you're right. But photosynthesis is divided into 2 steps. The first, which stores energy from the sun in the form of adenosine triphosphate, or ATP. And the second, the Calvin cycle, that captures carbon and turns it into sugar. This second phase represents one of nature's most sustainable production lines. And so with that, welcome to the world's most minuscule factory. The starting materials? A mix of CO2 molecules from the air and pre-assembled molecules called ribulose bisphosphate, or RUBP, each containing 5 carbons. The initiator? An industrious enzyme named Rubisco that welds 1 carbon atom from a CO2 molecule with the RUBP chain to build an initial 6-carbon sequence. That rapidly splits into 2 shorter chains containing 3 carbons each and called phosphoglycerates, or PGAs for short. Enter ATP and another chemical called nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide phosphate, or just NADPH. ATP, working like a lubricant, delivers energy, while NADPH affixes 1 hydrogen to each of the PGA chains, changing them into molecules called glyceraldehyde 3-phosphates, or G3Ps. Glucose needs 6 carbons to form, made from 2 molecules of G3P, which incidentally have 6 carbons between them. So sugar has just been manufactured, right? Not quite. The Calvin cycle works like a sustainable production line, meaning that those original RUBPs that kicked things off at the start need to be recreated by reusing materials within the cycle now. But each RUBP needs 5 carbons, and manufacturing glucose takes a whole 6. Something doesn't add up. The answer lies in one phenomenal fact. While we've been focusing on this single production line, 5 others have been happening at the same time. With 6 conveyor belts moving in unison, there isn't just 1 carbon that gets soldered to 1 RUBP chain, but 6 carbons soldered to 6 RUBPs. That creates 12 G3P chains instead of just 2, meaning that altogether 36 carbons exist, the precise number needed to manufacture sugar and rebuild those RUBPs. Of the 12 G3Ps pooled together, 2 are siphoned off to form that energy-rich 6-carbon glucose chain, the one fueling you via your breakfast. Success! But back on the manufacturing line, the byproducts of this sugar production are swiftly assembled to recreate those 6 RUBPs. That requires 30 carbons, the exact number contained by the remaining 10 G3Ps. Now, a molecular mix and match occurs. 2 of the G3Ps are welded together, forming a 6-carbon sequence. By adding a third G3P, a 9-carbon chain is built. The first RUBP, made up of 5 carbons, is cast from this, leaving 4 carbons behind. But there's no wastage here. Those are soldered to a 4th G3P molecule, making a 7-carbon chain. Added to a 5th G3P molecule, a 10-carbon chain is created. Enough now to craft 2 more RUBPs. With 3 full RUBPs recreated from 5 of the 10 G3Ps, simply duplicating this process will renew the 6 RUBP chains needed to restart the cycle again. So the Calvin cycle generates the precise number of elements and processes required to keep this biochemical production line turning endlessly. And it's just one of the hundreds of cycles present in nature. Why so many? Because if biological production processes were linear, they wouldn't be nearly as efficient or successful at using energy to manufacture the materials that nature relies upon, like sugar. Cycles create vital feedback loops that repeatedly reuse and rebuild ingredients, crafting as much as possible out of the planet's available resources. Such as that sugar, built using raw sunlight and carbon, converted in plant factories to become the energy that powers you and keeps the cycles revolving in your own life.
Wow, that was complex, right? So we think that we don't even think about the plants are out there doing their thing. And it's a cascade of biochemical events. That's the way I say it. It has to go through each one of those steps. Now, if you think about it, if it took 1,000,000 years for each one of those steps to take place, which is what a lot of the evolutionists would say, then there's no way the plants would have grown. All right. So I believe it had to be designed that way, and that complexity is built in to show how far above God is, right? How high above us He is. And so the fact that we've been figuring these things out is pretty amazing stuff. Okay, so now we'd be talking lab time right here. We would be making a little terrarium, which was we would put our seeds in our cup and that kind of thing. We would look at some leaves that I have. I have a plant that I was going to bring. I would have brought some carrots and beets and radishes for us to look at and cut into. And we would also look at flowers today. And then I had the microscope set up to look at those in those slides under the scope. All right, so I'm sorry we couldn't do this today. And if another time presents itself where I can bring these things back in, I think it might actually in this class, then we'll go ahead and try to do this rest of this lab. But I think next week we're moving on to something new. So, okay, kiddos, well, stay warm. I hope you were able to get this and to watch it, and it was interesting to you. And I will definitely see you next week. All right, so long.